Senate will come to order for this Wednesday, final day of March 31st. And we're just going to excuse our Labor Health Committee and get things started here. Let's start with roll call.
Roll call, Legislative Day 30, Wednesday, March 31st. Anderson? Here. Baldwin? Excused? Excused. Beitman? Here. Boner?
Here.
Bouchard? Excused. Case? Present. Cooper? Here. Driscoll? Here. Ellis? French? Here. Furphy? Excused. Garou? Here. Hicks? Here. Hutchings? Excused. James? Here. Kinski? Here. Kolb? Present. Cost? Here. Landon? Here. McEwen? Excused. Nethercott? Pappas? Here. Perkins? Here. Rothfuss? Here. Salazar? Here. Schuler? Here. Scott? Here. Steinmetz? Here. Wasserberger? Here. President Dockstader? Here. 25 present, 5 excused.
Prayer by Pastor Allison George, St. Paul's Lutheran Church.
And that roll call starts to sound like a song after a while, right? Okay. So it's the Wednesday of Holy Week. So we'll start with a big deep breath, and then I've got a reading from Hebrews for you. And then I'm going to add a special blessing today for everyone. Take a big deep breath. Let's do another big deep breath and do a little roll your shoulders, shake it out. A reading from Hebrews. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such hostility against himself from sinners, so that you may not grow weary or lose heart. Let's pray. Almighty God, your Son, our Savior, suffered at human hands and endured the shame of the cross. Grant that we may walk in the way of his cross and find it in the way of life and peace through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And this blessing today, so March 31st is the Trans Day of Visibility, and I found this beautiful blessing that honors a God that is full of kaleidoscopic joy. So receive this benediction and blessing. May the kaleidoscopic delight of God fill your souls with joy and give you strength to celebrate and embody Christ's love in the world. And may the blessing of God, creating, transforming, and making new, bring you to your true and loving home, now and always. Amen.
Senator James, would you start us in the pledge?
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Reading, correction, approval of the journal. Will the reading clerk please read the journal committee report?
Mr. President, your journal committee reports that the journal of March 30, 2021 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Senator Kolb, chairman.
Thank you. Today in Wyoming history, we don't have Senator Hicks here. He could set history like this. Senator Hicks missing in action. Elwood Mead was a central figure in the history of reclamation projects in the arid West for several decades. On this day in 1888, I'll just wait a minute. There we go. Oh, have quiet. Thank you. On this day in 1888, Meade was appointed Wyoming Territorial Engineer and was Wyoming's first state engineer, serving until 1899. As such, Meade was initially involved in the drafting and administration of Wyoming's water laws. Meade's engineering reports on the Shoshone River provided crucial backing for William F. Cody and his partners in the Cody Canal Project. In 1924, Meade was appointed commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. In that capacity, he oversaw the construction of what is now called the Hoover Dam. The reservoir behind Hoover Dam is named Lake Meade in his honor. That's interesting history, water history. Quote for the day: strong people stand up for themselves, but stronger people stand up for others. Session status. Today is the last day for bills to be reported out of committee in the second house. Go ahead, Senator Kinski.
Privilege of the floor.
Please do.
So I was flipping through some notes this morning, and I came across an old Ronald Reagan joke that I thought I'd share with the group. And he said there was this insurance agent, he was opening a new office, and he wanted flowers for the grand opening. So he asked for a very nice arrangement to be delivered, and he was there in the new office with the grand opening, and the flowers showed up, and they had a big black ribbon across them, and it said, "Sorry for your loss." And he was just outraged. He spent all that money, and they sent him flowers that were supposed to go to a funeral. So when the grand opening was all over, he went to the floral shop and found the owner and gave him a piece of his mind. And the owner listened to him, and then he said, "Well, you think you've got it tough. Somewhere in town, there's a funeral with arrangement of flowers that says, 'Good luck in your new location.'"
Okay. Very good. Thank you. We got a note here that our colleagues in Labored Health, they're going to continue hearing testimony on HB 162 until it's complete, so we'll just excuse them for that. Senator Hicks, I was watching for you because of all this water history and thought you'd find that interesting. Maybe we'll name a body of water after you somewhere along the way. Okay,
Mr. President, or at least a puddle.
something. Thank you. Messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, March 30, 2021. Mr. President, the House adopted the Joint Conference Committee Number 1 report on House Bill 7, Air Ambulance Membership Organizations Regulation. Ayes 53, noes 3, excused 4. Message number 350, March 30, 2021. Mr. President, the House failed to concur on Senate amendments to House Bill number 22, Wyoming Military Code. Ayes 1, noes 48, excused 11. Message number 349, March 30, 2021. Mr. President, the House did concur on Senate amendments to the following bills by the votes indicated. Message number 349, House Bill 85, unlawful dissemination of an intimate image. Ayes 52, noes 1, excused 7. Message number 351, House Bill 68, Wyoming Statutory Foundation Act amendments. Ayes 49, excused 11. Message number 352, House Bill 101, elk feed ground closings requirements. Ayes 48, noes 2, excused 10. Message number 353, House Bill number 112, Pioneer Trapper License. Ayes 48, noes 1, excused 11. Message number 355, House Bill 133, online sports wagering. Ayes 36, noes 20, excused 4. Message number 357. Mr. President, the House appointed House conferees to meet with the like committee number 1 from the Senate on amendments to House Bill 22. House conferees are Representative Greer, Chairman, Representative Larson, and Representative Oakley. Message number 356. Mr. President, the House appointed House conferees to meet with the like committee number 1 from the Senate on amendments to Senate File 25. House conferees are Representative Greer, Chairman, Representative Crago, and Representative Walters. Signed, Wendy Harding, House Chief Clerk.
Let's go to concurrences now. Senator Cost, are you ready on message number 348? Yeah, I think we're going to make a call here pointing out that 5 members would not be able to vote on these. So Senator Cost, just settle back down in that chair. Thank you. Senator Driscoll.
Could I suggest we go to second reading, then we'll go to committee of the whole, and then we can go to third.
We'll do that. We'll hold the thirds for our other members when they get up. Okay, let's go to standing committee reports and then to second readings.
March 30, 2021. Mr. President, to committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom is referred House Bill 51 engrossed, meat processing programs, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. I, Senators Boner, Bouchard, French, Cost and Wasserberger. Senator Boner, Chairman. March 30, 2021, Mr. President, to committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom is referred House Bill 158 engrossed, local land use planning and zoning. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. I, Senators Boner, Bouchard, French, Cost and Wasserberger. Senator Boner, Chairman. March 31, 2021, Mr. President, to committee number 4, Education, to whom was referred House Bill 231 engrossed, college credit retention. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. I, Senators Beitman, Rothfuss, Salazar, and Scott. No, Senator Ellis. Senator Scott, Chairman.
Thank you. Bills on second reading. House Bill 75, second reading of the House bill.
House Bill 75, voter identification.
There are no amendments. House Bill 75, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 116, second reading of the House bill.
House Bill 116, concealed carry residency requirement 2.
There are no amendments. House Bill 116, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 135, second reading of the House bill.
House Bill 135, Hank Co. Leadership Highway designation.
There is an amendment. Senator Landon. Read in the amendment, please.
House Bill 135, second reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, corrected copy, page 1, line 12 after.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 135. Fellow senators, this bill came over to us from the other side, had a lot of work done along the way, and inadvertently, the language in the bill, you might recall, it's been quite a while since we talked about this one, but the language in the bill indicated that we would single out a stretch of highway just south of the town of Cody on up to the north side of Cody in honor of one of our former senators here. The problem is we, in the meantime, have heard from the sheriff and some of the commissioners up in that neck of the woods, Mr. President, and that particular highway is not Highway 120. So what this amendment does, it goes in and suggests that we take a little bit different tack with it and fix the bill. Knowing how much the former senator cared about the small community to the south of his hometown, he was always referencing that school district, you might remember, and how proud he was of those Matitsi Longhorns. Well, this amendment would suggest that we designate that portion of highway from the boundary of Matitsi up to the boundary of Cody on Highway 120. That's what the amendment does. I think it fixes what was wrong with the bill before, and I hope you'll support the amendment. Thank you.
Further questions? Senator Case.
Well, Mr. President, I think that's a really good idea, but I wonder if we could bring a third reading amendment to raise the speed limit on that stretch of highway.
In honor of a senator known for speed limits and heavy travel, Senator Landon.
Mr. President, that would be a friendly amendment.
Okay, so considered. Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment or questions? Ready for the question? All those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 135, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. We're back on the bill. House Bill 135 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall a bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. House Bill 188, second reading of the House Bill.
House Bill 188, irrigation district loans.
There is an amendment. Please read in the amendment.
House Bill 188, second reading amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 1 above line 1 in.
Thank you. Introduction of water. Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 188. Members of the body, this just comes in and provides, includes water conservancy districts as eligible entities for loans on the bill that we talked about yesterday. Water conservancy districts are a subdivision of state government. They're formed under Wyoming water law in 413701. They're a lesser known entity. Most of the irrigation districts you find around the state are really derived under the Bureau Reclamation Program. Prior to BOR, there was a statutory provision that allowed water conservancy districts to be formed. They do serve the exact same purpose. They just don't have any federal nexus with the Bureau of Reclamation associated, but they do the same thing as irrigation districts. On and for the amendments, would stand for any questions.
Questions on the amendment? Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, I'm just wondering why the third line has a water conservancy and the others don't. Is there some reason for that?
Let's collect a couple more questions if needed. If not, we'll go back to the sponsor, Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, could I have the good chairman of Minerals repeat that question? I didn't catch that.
Senator Anderson.
See, it's on line 10 of the amendment, Mr. President, and it says, or a water conservancy, whereas the other 3 lines just say a water conservancy.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have an explanation. My guess it's probably a technical correction, but I will run that past our staff attorneys and make sure why that's says A.
Senator, do you want to lay it back or move it through with the technical?
Mr.
error?
President, I just leave it in there. My guess is that not having the bill right here handy to track that in, there may be a reason for that, but if I need to come back and correct that, I'll do that as a third reading.
Thank you. Okay, we'll proceed then with the amendment. Any further discussion? All those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 188, say aye. Those opposed, nay. Back on the bill. House Bill 188 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. So with that, folks, while we wait for Committee 10 to rejoin us, they've got some heavy lifting this morning. We will call on the majority floor leader. Bring us into Committee of the Whole. Mr. Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move the Senate resolve itself into Committee of the Whole.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Senator Salazar. Salazar, you are in charge of the Senate.
Division.
Committee of the Whole will come to order. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 173. The good reading clerk will read the House bill.
House Bill 173 engrossed School Finance Funding 2, sponsored by the House Education Committee, an act relating to school finance. It was referred to Committee number 4, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Ellis, Salazar, and Scott. No, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Scott, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your intention? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move when the committee of the whole rise and report to do so with the recommendation that House Bill 173 do pass. There was a standing committee amendment. I'm going to ask it be read in after we've had an initial explanation of this. Mr. Chairman, this is recalibration bill, the second go around. And Mr. Chairman, in the time since we dealt with this issue in the Senate file, which was intended as the backup all along, we have had a radical change in the environment that we're dealing with. The passage of the new federal stimulus act, the so-called ARP Act, has frankly changed everything we're doing, or changed a lot of the things we're doing. So this bill will have some significant features that are very different from what you've seen, and they're because of that change. They basically, the key issues have switched from how do we get our spending on schools under control to how do we deal with the federal funds so that we can make the best use out of them and not get unduly trapped by those things. So it really is a very changed bill. I'm going to take you through the bill as it came to us, stressing some of the things that we won't change in committee amendments. And then we'll go through the amendments. That'll be where probably the real action is. This bill on starting on page 2 and going clear through to page 48 has the feature that is common to all the recalibration bills that have been considered this year. And that is to take what has been a non-codified piece of law known as Attachment A and codify it. It's codifying the way the existing model works. This was done, I think the credit for this goes largely to the LSO staff, who says that dealing with this non-codified law we've had has just not worked very well. It's an invitation to confusion. Better to put it right in the statutes. And everybody that's looked at it, I think, has agreed with them. And that's what the first 48 pages of the bill do. Instructive for those of you who have the time to read it. You see how much detail our school funding model goes into and how it works. And remember that it's a block grant now. So those details are advisory. They're how we compute what the districts get, but they don't dictate to the districts what they actually do. So remember that if you choose to look at that. But that, I think, is totally non-controversial. Then starting on page 50, starting at line 20 and going over to page 52, there is a change that the House made that we haven't seen before. There was the question was what counts for average daily membership in the schools, which is what they get paid on, was the formula works all the way through. And the question, if you get a student who's there part-time, what does it take to be counted as a full-time student? That used to be 50%, was changed a few years to go to 80%. The House took it back to 75%. This is important, Mr. President, because at the, particularly at the high school level, you will get students who are not quite full-time for any number of reasons. They can have a job, which may be very valuable to them, both for the experience and for the monetary results, but particularly for the experience. In a number of communities, They go over to their church for religious instruction. That happens. And we didn't consider that here in the Senate. The House said, no, 75% is a better figure. And it's not, we aren't challenging that in any amendment. So I bring that to your attention as a feature that's in the bill. On page 53, starting at line 11, the House, this is an issue that's familiar. The House said, let's reduce the expenses under the block grant by not funding the insurance for the people who don't take it. You recall the discussion here, there's about 27% of the teachers are not, of all the people that work for school district, don't take the insurance. We fund them as if everybody took it. That's not in accordance with reality. We cut that out here on our version. The House did the same, but they phased it in over 3 years. And here's a place where events overtook what we were doing, because in the interval, the feds passed the stimulus bill with all that education funding. I think while our bill was on second reading, but we didn't have any opportunity to understand what was in it or adjust to it. The House had had a little time, and then they adjusted. You can't take the full amount out without violating the federal maintenance of effort. And so they first put it in as a rolling average, and then they reacted to that. And we're going to fine tune that a little further in an amendment. But that starts on page 53 there. That's an important piece. On page 60, they are the bill. Let me get to that. We have some intervening language back in the bill that does relate to the change away from attachment A and putting statute. That's not controversial. On page 60, you have a provision that is how you deal with the distribution of school foundation programs. Given the federal American Rescue Plan Act, we're going to come back and refine some of those provisions. You have then a provision that we will deal with in the amendment, so I won't go into detail here, where the House added 0.5% sales tax, and the House added a diversion relating to the 1% severance tax. Where you're going to see the standing committee amendment will propose take both of those out. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the standing committee amendment. And that goes on until you get over to you have some various technical amendments. Then you have on page 67, section 5 starts there and continues on all the way to page 69, line 18, what was known as the Barlow Amendment. And that is the bill is then reacting to that new federal act. And that amendment says we will reduce our model as much as is allowed, dollar for dollar, on the maintenance of effort. We retain that feature. Very, very useful. It gets us down to what the feds allow and allows that to be very fine tuned. That was the house, frankly, the other house did some very good work in this particular area, adjusting to what the feds had done to us. And we'll refine what they do in some other areas. But this piece in particular was good work. And some of the other areas, frankly, it was not well enough understood when this bill was being heard the other end of the Capitol. And we'll have to modify that. And then we have some, a couple of studies and another piece there that we'll deal with in amendments. That's a very quick run through of the bill itself with some emphasis on the parts that we aren't proposing to change. So unless there's commentary, questions on some of those non-controversial things or things that we aren't changing, I'll ask to have the standing committee amendment read in at this time.
House Bill 173, Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to engrossed copy, page 1, line 8, delete.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, move adoption of the standing committee amendment. Mr. Chairman, this is key to what we're doing to the bill. You'll have a couple of, I think, 3 committee of the whole amendments that refine it a little further, but this is the key provisions. We've done a number of things here. The first, starting on the first page with the page 6, line 13 reference, what your Senate committee is recommending in the standing committee amendment is that we start dealing with the ghost teacher situation. And what we've done here has been influenced by the federal enactment, because we have to be careful not to breach the maintenance of effort requirements. So we thought it was very important to, as we did on the recalibration bill that we passed out of here earlier, to provide special protections for the teachers, because the teachers are the key people that make our education system work. They're the frontline workers who actually get the job of teaching the young folks done. And so we want to protect them. And what we're trying to do here is align the funding in the model to the reality. And so what we're doing is increasing the class sizes by 2. That reduces the call for teachers in the model. That gets rid of the majority, not all, but the majority of the ghost teachers we're funding that don't exist. But we can't, before we added that to some other savings and came back and did a restoration and put funds in for teachers. Here, what we're doing is the instructions we had, the staff was structure the amendment so that we increase funding for teachers and protect the salaries and the increased funding as a categorical grant. So it can't be switched to other components, and do it in a revenue neutral fashion. So we can't breach the maintenance of effort on the federal stimulus. That's the concept we bring it. There was an error made in, this thing is extraordinarily complex. And there was an error made in computing the resulting salaries. We thought it'd be a 10% increase, be revenue neutral. Turns out to be 8.8%. We'll have to adjust that in the committee of the whole amendment. And I want to emphasize, it was an error. Cut the LSO a little slack on this. This thing has been extraordinarily complex. We've we've relied on them. They've done excellent work. It's a miracle to me that there was only one computational error made that we have to correct. But when they found it, they came to us instantly, but it was too late to fix standing committee amendments. So we'll have a committee of the whole. But that's what this does. It's intended to be neutral in terms of the size of the block grant, but align the block grant more to reality where the districts are paying the teachers more and not running a small class size. So that's what that does. Then we go over, we get through the teachers, although the teacher's salary comes in again, the adjustment on 21.9.101 in the amendment relates to the teachers again. But then the rest of the material where we're deleting on lines 48 and 4950, that's starting to deal with the issue of the diversion that was in here. On line 39 on page 2, reference page 56, line 7, where we're going from 2/3 to 1/3 there, what we're doing is the House had a rolling average on putting in the reduction for insurance. We said that's better to do it at once. It's more defensible in terms of our own legal situation with our own courts. And the Barlow amendment picks up the slack, and we're not changing the total amount the school districts get. We're changing the mechanism to the insurance reduction from the Barlow amendment. That effect's about the same, but it's a little more legally defensible. And then you get all mixed up together on page 63, pages 64, 66, page 67. Those deletions are related to the diversions and to the 0.5% increase in the sales tax. We're taking both of those out. And I will promise the Senate, I will come back personally on second reading and give you a clean amendment relating just to the sales tax, so that you can clearly express your opinion on that. I urge you to adopt this. It's all intertwined. I don't see how you could divide it with the diversions and the severance tax, just the way amendments are written around here. So we'll have a clean opportunity to deal with that on second reading. But this deals with both of those together. And then we redo some things at the back of it, how the federal funds are going to be dealt with. And this is something where we're refining the good work that the House started. And we'll have a further amendment on that, because we talked to the state superintendent's people after they'd had a chance to digest this and got some suggestions. But essentially the plan outlined here is the money that comes in, the 300 million that comes in, and slightly more than that, and 90% of that, or approximately 270 million plus a little bit, has to go to the school districts. And what we're saying is that they should use it for things that are within the model. The feds gave a great big laundry list of what it can be used for. And we took a careful look at that and consulted the State Department of Education as well, after we'd written the thing, to make sure we were right. We're saying that money can be spent, has to be very carefully spent within the federal guidelines. But if we put the additional guideline on, it has to be spent within what our model provides for. It looks like to be absolutely no trouble in achieving both of those objectives. And this requires that happen. The effect of that will be that because we fund the model entirely, there will be some of the items there will be double funded up to the amount of the 270 million we get from the feds over a 2-year period. That will take the displaced state and local resources and put them into a reserve account. Can only be spent on things within the model. So they'll carry forward to the time when we might really need it because we have a structural deficit. So instead of reducing the spending of the districts, will you take advantage of the federal stimulus to build our total reserves in the system, be at the district level, but building the total reserves in the system to not quite what we would have achieved with a 10% funding reduction, but it'll come within about 30 million of that, which is really very close. So that's the regulatory scheme here. We'll have some further amendments to refine it, but that's what's going on. And it looks like, to the best of our knowledge at this point with the federal requirements, that they can meet all the federal requirements. And we have to be very careful that they do, very careful. And we're taking the proper precautions. And that we'll be able then to achieve those savings, which when combined with the reductions from the insurance, bringing that closer to reality, and combined with the Barlow Amendment, the net savings will be in the vicinity of 430 million, plus or minus a little bit, that will be able to go forward to the time when we might not be able to fully fund the model because our reserves will be exhausted. And I've gone over it carefully with the State Department, with our experts here. It looks to me like it'll work just fine. And that will mean we can, in good conscience, accept the federal money and make sure it gets put to good use. What we don't want to see happen is the money go out without restrictions to school district. And somebody says, gee, I've always wanted, and they don't pay attention to the federal guidelines, which I think the feds would just love to catch a red state misspending that and nail us. And that would be very expensive. You recall the governor cautioned us on the first CARES Act on exactly this point. So I think that's something we do need to be very careful about. And we need to be very careful to preserve it for our future needs. And we think this will get that done. So this is a very important section. Now, we've done some other things, and I'd like to yield, Mr. Chairman, to Senator Ellis to explain those, and some of those will have further amendments too.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To bring us home on the amendment, if you look at your initial bill, you'll see that it calls for in section 6 and section 7 on pages 69 and 70. The first being a study that would be conducted by the State Board of Education on the reorganization of Wyoming school districts to improve efficiency and administration. As it was proposed, this work would be conducted by the State Board of Education, and they would have to until October 1st, I believe, to get the work done. And we heard in committee, the State Board expressed some concern with not only the time frame, but their ability to get this work done. They have undertaken a massive effort to define what it means to be a graduate. A profile of a graduate is what they're calling it. And so their time will be spent doing that work for most of this year, excuse me. And so what this amendment would do would be to, through the executive branch and led by the governor's office, instead of relying on the state board, put it on the governor's office to loop in the state budget department, the Department of Revenue, the Attorney General's office, as well as the Department of Education to do this work. And they would be given until November 15th, 2022 to provide us with this information. So that's the first piece of this. And we wanted to make sure it was a little bit more broad and tailored to what we were getting after. In the initial amendment, there was reference to creating 2 districts for the Wind River Indian Reservation. Rather than be so specific, we stepped it back and said our concern is understanding impact aid, which doesn't just affect the Wind River Reservation, but could impact other areas. And so that's the amendment on that piece. And then it would delete what you would see on page 70 in section 7,
which would require the state superintendent to prepare a report on involuntary layoffs. As we discussed this concept in committee, there was concern about just limiting it to involuntary layoffs. Certainly through attrition or early retirement, school districts have those tools to reduce or modify their staffing levels. And ultimately, we felt that this is something that's going to occur anyway when, as we implement this bill, we don't foresee as many involuntary layoffs occurring. At the time this amendment was added, I believe the projected amount to be reduced in the House was at around 70 million. And this is a much more modest bill. It does not even get to the level of a $70 million reduction. So rather than have that requirement in the statute, we didn't think it was necessary. But that's the remainder of the amendment. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and on and for the amendment, but there's some things that I have some real concern on that I would like to have some answers on. First of all, my biggest concern with the idea of working on the ghost teachers, which I'm certainly supportive of, is are we making sure that the amount of money we're going to have adequately covers the teachers we have? Because getting rid of the ghost teachers is fine, but if all of a sudden that money that's been used for teachers cuts short the salaries on teachers, then that worries me. And so we've always said we want to protect the teachers' salaries. I think that's still the same thing we want to protect. I just want to make sure that that's in there so that we know we have adequate funding for that. The second thing is, I know that it's the federal government has said supplant can take place in some of this stuff, but I think we got to be very careful there because I think that could come back to bite us. What happens 3 or 4 years down the road when this federal money is used up and supplanting has been used rather than supplementing, and now the results of an audit the next year on the districts is saying, well, you were using that as federal money, now you need to continue to do that, or what happens? And I'm not sure you can answer that. I think that's something that worries me for the future because it definitely sets up a situation where we could get hit with a supplanting if we tried to use district funds after using federal funds. That worries me. Another thing that isn't in here, but we may need to consider it. I understand that they had removed the nurses. We need to have nurses in our system. To say we don't, I can guarantee you there are shots and there are different, like for those that have severe allergies and everything else, the nebulizers and all the nurses have to use. And so to just totally eliminate nurses would be a detrimental situation. I'm hoping that's still in there. I know it wasn't in the amendment, but I'd heard it had been removed from the other, and I just need those questions answered, please. Thank you.
We'll take Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the amendment, for the most part, but I have some real issues with section 7. I'm wondering why we're piggybacking redistricting, which is a completely separate issue than school finance on a school finance bill. Representing 7 school districts myself, 7 small ones. That section 7 is just about a deal breaker. We need to keep the redistricting separate from school finance at this point, if that's possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you. Just on the amendment and for the amendment. The first question is perhaps the most important. Will we be able to get a tracked version of the bill prior to the second reading, which would be very helpful. Second is the revenue neutrality as to the size of the block grant. This is separate and apart from the Barlow amendment, which is a different thing. If I understand it, this revenue neutrality, you're trying to balance 2 things to get the salaries up, make it categorical, while still respecting the MOE restrictions in the ARP. I just want to make sure that this revenue neutrality is different distinct from the Barlow Amendment. Second, I think what you said is that in the balance of the amendment, you're putting the diversion back. And then you will bring on second amendment, on second reading, an amendment that deals separately with the sales tax. I want to confirm that that's my correct understanding. Third, on the health insurance, I understand that in the bill, we eliminate insurance for people who don't take it. That's fine. And in the amendment, you get rid of most of the ghost teachers, which helps significantly reduce the insurance cost, which is fine. If I'm following you, we've not done anything with the fact that the current model will pay a district the greater of their actual out-of-pocket health insurance cost or what the state's cost is. And that's been a topic of some discussion because nearly all the districts, as I understand it, buy insurance cheaper than what the state plan is, but we reimburse based on the state plan, and there's significant dollars there. And then following up with my concerns of my friend from Tinsleep, although the amendment does not, I don't think it refers to it specifically as consolidation, the dreaded C word. It calls it reorganization and efficiency and administration. I just want to make sure that all that is in this bill with respect to consolidation is a study. And that's just my questions on the amendment. Thank you.
We'll go to Senator Wasserberger and then Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, I just want my microphone off.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just want my microphone on.
It's on, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering why we have section 6 and section 7. And so the issue is that we're going to have the Wyoming State Board of Education do a study on efficiencies in schools. And in section 7, we're asking for the executive branch essentially to make recommendations on school reorganization. And I think that both of those issues are issues for the interim education committee to decide. And I think that they should. I think those should be interim studies and they should make a recommendation and they should come back with a bill. I don't think we should give it to other organizations to do what we can do ourselves. So questions on why section 6 and section 7 are in the bill. And also a question on nurses. Want to make sure that our nurses are still in our funding model. So those are my questions at this time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Ellis and then Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question, just to try and catch up a little bit on some of this. On section 6, you'll see in the original bill that came over from down the hall, this was a topic and an idea that came to us about looking for efficiencies. And so we didn't want to completely toss it aside. We wanted to honor their work, but we just wanted to adjust who would be providing this review. And certainly this is something that we can talk about in the interim. And I think that your Senate Education Committee members are very interested in doing that. But this more or less outlines who would be the most appropriate and has the right information in our agencies. It is the State Department of Budget, Department of Education, Department of Revenue, because they know tax district lines, as well as the Attorney General. So that was kind of our thinking. And in visiting with the State Board of Education, they didn't feel like not only they had the bandwidth to do this right now, but also the expertise. Our State Board of Education is very wise and knowledgeable when it comes to discussing what kids need to be learning in classrooms, but that knowledge doesn't necessarily translate to boundary district lines and service agreements and those kind of things. So that's why it's in there. It's an attempt to work with our House counterparts to come up with an idea to take a closer look at some possible efficiencies that we might see. To the point though about why section 7, I think that those were the concerns we raised in committee. And so we delete that with this amendment entirely. So, if we want to hear about layoffs, I can promise you that your school districts will communicate that to us directly. I'm confident of that. So we just didn't think it was necessary to have a formal report to that effect. Plus, we were also, we don't believe that with the amount of reductions in this particular bill that we'll see a ton of layoffs as envisioned when this amendment was added down the hall. And then to just kind of visit about the concern, are we trying to consolidate school districts? Are we, is this a non-starter? And I just want to offer that we have things called Board of Cooperative Education Services, which are ways that entities like school districts and colleges and can work together to provide some of those shared services. So I don't necessarily see this as an elimination of any of the smaller school districts necessarily. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but a study of how can we be more efficient with our work. So we can always take action on that, or we can always decide that we don't want to. So I don't want this study to be a cause of concern for the member in this chamber who raised concern about his small school districts. It's just a look, and that one that our constituents often ask for, why do we have 48 school districts for 23 counties in Wyoming? And I think that's a fair question. So just looking for some efficiencies, I wouldn't be too concerned. Well, I think this could lead to some really important information, but many more steps to go before we take action on any of the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask an indulgence if there are more questions. Frankly, I can't keep in mind as many questions as were asked. And this is committee of the whole, so we have unlimited debate. And I would ask that I be able to answer questions before too many of them pile up, because I'm sure I'm going to forget some and somebody's going to have to ask their question again. Let me try to respond to the ones that I got. Several people asked about question of nurses. That arises because in an initial draft in one of these amendments, they were mentioned, and then the LSO staff discovered they were covered as a support position. And the model doesn't change in the way nurses are dealt with. So that'll be as it is right now. So I hope that allies that concern. That was, I think I know where the source of it was, and it was an accident. And please don't anybody get after the LSO. This thing is very complicated, and they have done just a marvelous job. With regard to the neutrality of things here, the federal maintenance of effort requirement is unusual. I've never seen anything like it before. They go back and they take what we did for 3 years in different ways and average it, and you can't go over that. The net effect, and I am relying on our LSO staff, but I think they have double checked it and triple checked it, and I think they're 100% accurate on this, is that we can reduce within the model by $40+ million. I don't remember the exact figure. It's a little over 40 million. Maybe as much as 45 million. What's happened is we have the bill as it comes to us, which we've modified with this amendment slightly, takes the majority of that reduction in the insurance that is paid to people who do not take insurance. It's paid for in the model payment, paid for people who do not take insurance. That's a very defensible reduction in terms of our own court decision. You have the constitutional mandate to be efficient, and not paying in the model for something that isn't being used. That strikes me as the very name of efficiencies here. We can't take the full amount because that would exceed the maintenance of effort. We violate the maintenance of effort requirement. So we're taking 2/3 basically. The House got to that over a period of years. We get to it right away. In either case, whether you adopt finally in a conference committee, the House version or our version, the Barlow amendment, which is not changed by this, comes in and takes whatever that reduction was, takes it up, right up to the federal limit, so that we get as much as we can within that federal limit. So that what that means if we do things elsewhere in the model, the change of funding, we have to be sure to be revenue neutral. And that's what we're doing with the trying to reduce the class sizes to get rid of the ghost teachers. They don't get rid of all of them, but it reduces the class size to get rid of the ghost teachers and increases the reimbursement for teachers' salaries up to almost where they really are. So that should be net neutral. If we're off a bit, there's a further saving grace. You can transfer, with the categorical nature of this, you can transfer funds from the rest of the model into the teacher's salaries. I don't think anybody's going to have to. And when we get to that amendment, we'll explain we are keeping a little positive margin for the teachers to help protect against that. But I think the net effect, all right, I'm gonna say I think, the net effect will be, with the mechanics of the way the amendments interplay, to be we will get a reduction right up to the federal maintenance of effort requirement. And it is a different requirement. There was concern about the fact that we're going to be supplanting the funding under the model with federal funds. And that concern, we often have a provision in federal laws that don't allow that. In this case, the provision apparently explicitly allows it. So that has not been a concern. And I've dealt with our LSO experts in this area and some other areas, and we are doing this sort of thing routinely here because it is allowed. And so that has not been a concern. We do not expect trouble with the feds on this. And I think that's something you can take to the bank. It was pretty clear in the federal enactment. With regard to the proposed sales tax, we took that out and the diversion out, which probably the Appropriations Committee could explain better than I can what they're up to here, but they're after the 1% severance tax, and they're diverting it in different ways from what we've otherwise done. And in the mechanics of how things are done, the two are intertwined. So I strongly urge the Senate to adopt the Standing Committee amendment. I will bring back the sales tax as a separate amendment where you'll have a clean vote. And I'll clean up some of their trigger mechanisms too, so that you can express yourselves on that on second reading. And I will do that. I promise you I will. Mr. Chairman, if I've missed some of the questions, you know, I am the oldest member of the Senate. I claim to be capable of having a senior moment when it comes to remembering questions.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I know there was a question about nurses, and they are included in pupil support staffing, which you can find on page 16, lines 7 through page 17, line 11. So that has not been excluded from the model.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the Standing Committee amendment, I just had a couple of questions. First, whatever assurance that the committee might be able to give me with regard to teacher salaries, knowing that our market is driven well above the model now. I know we've tried to pay a lot of attention to the teacher part of this block grant. I wonder if the teachers will even get a raise in this situation if they take on heavier class loads. So that's my first question. You know, what the impact is going to be with that model regarding the teacher salaries. And then second, was there any conversation on the Senate Education Committee with regard to the 16-to-1 ratio in grades kindergarten through 3? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, answering that, in general, what we've done here is try to reflect reality. I don't know whether there be any district that will have to raise its class size as a result of this. There could be one, but where the amount we're taking out of them by reducing the class size is going to be more than replaced by the increase in the teacher salaries. So if you do have a district that is actually using a lower class size, no reason they can't continue to do that as long as they can pay for it within their teacher salaries. And remember, we're raising. So it's not designed primarily to give the teachers a raise, but if you had a district that was using a lower class size and raised it, then they would have the resources to give a raise, or should on this. Now, you do have district differences from one district to the next as to what their policy is, but the money should come out adequate because that is designed to be revenue neutral. So that's I hope that answers the question, but that's what's going on there. I think I'm missing a piece of a question. Did that adequately cover it, Mr. Chairman?
Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, just specific to the teacher salaries, just wondering with what we're doing with this block grant, what I think I want to be sure that I take home is the knowledge that we're not going to just reduce the block grant and then reduce teacher salaries. How does this impact this teacher salary piece? Knowing that teachers are already above the model. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott?
What we're trying to do is recognize that reality in the model by having a reduction in the need for teachers to meet the lower class size that gets rid of the ghost teachers that aren't there and recognizes that the money is going into higher salaries. And we're essentially refining the model to come closer to reality. It should net be a slight benefit to the districts because we're taking precautions to raise the teacher funding amount just a little more than we're losing due to the class size reduction, so that we don't have any risk of impinging on the maintenance of effort. So most teachers in the real world, I think, won't see any difference at all. If they do see any difference, there might be a slight increase. The district might be able to increase their salary slightly. But it does depend a little on the circumstances in the individual districts. And we do have the protection that they can bring in money from elsewhere in the model if they need to. I don't think they're going to need to, but that's a possibility.
Senator Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for the good chair. We never really got a good answer on Section 7. We never really got a good answer, sir, on Section 7. Whether we call it reorganization or consolidation or whatever you want to call it, the net result's still the same. It's the death of the small communities. These schools are so important to the small communities, and when we combine or reorganize or whatever we want to call them, the small schools are the ones that lose in every case. In every case, that's how it's been across the state. The independence of these small districts is just critical, and I'm wondering if we can't back that out of this bill and put it back into the interim study and let it be its own bill as it should be, rather than trying to piggyback it. And I'm not sure the right word. I don't believe it belongs here in this finance bill. It should be a separate standalone topic, sir. Thank you.
Senator Scott?
Okay, and I'll ask Cindy Ellis to back me up. That's this whole business, Mr. Chairman, of consolidation and district consolidation of functions. It is a very sensitive one. What we are asking when we're all said and done, and there'll be a further amendment, What we are asking is that there be an objective look from outside the education community on what things really are. And let me talk for a minute about the realities. You have consolidated districts, major districts mostly in the larger communities, but some of the smaller ones. Lusk comes to mind, Niobrara County comes to mind as one that is countywide. The people see that we are duplicating a lot of services, a lot of positions. And say, if you're going to get real about school funding, you gotta get rid of that. And those of us who represent the larger communities, including this one right here, where there are 2 districts, but like Natrona County, Campbell County, some of these others that have already consolidated. We're hearing from back home big time that the first thing to do is to get down to 1 district per county. It doesn't save as much as you might think. I think the better strategy in dealing with that pressure is to have an objective look from the outside and say, what can we really do some county consolidation of services to get savings there and leave the districts intact? The risk is that if we press too far, the political pressure on your members from the larger districts will pass a bill such as there was on the other side this time. They just plain do it. Statewide consolidation, 1 district per county, and that's it. So I think the effort to avoid having a look at it, I'll be blunt about this. I think it's playing with political fire, where you could wind up with a very divisive vote, where the pressures that those of us from the larger communities are under, people have an exaggerated view of how much all these little districts are costing. And under the kind of budget pressure we're going to be under, I think this is far and away the best strategy for dealing with that issue that will produce a result that everybody can live with. We won't get the savings that some of the people imagine they aren't there. We will get some of them that are possible, but not as much as are possible, and will preserve the integrity of the smaller communities, because we're sensitive to it. But it does, I'll tell you, I hear it in the supermarket all the time back home. Why don't you get rid of all those little districts? That would solve your problem. No, it doesn't solve the problem, but that's the pressure we're under. And it does save significant money. So compromise is where we're trying to head. And that's what these studies are trying to do. We're trying to get it so we'll get a good objective study that people can rely on. In the other bill, we did it by saying we're going to consolidate services and then gave the state superintendent a year to work it out in each county. That's another approach that would work too, but this is the one that's before us now. And we're trying to work within that. We think it'll be easier dealing with the other house. But there needs to be a compromise. This is one of those things, Mr. Chairman, where bluntly, the politics of it are that a compromise that can meet everybody's needs is what we need. And I think none of us can say, by God, this is my position, I'm deviating from it. That's asking for a disaster. To be blunt about it, Mr. Chairman, that's my feelings on this subject. It is a very sensitive
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to say that I think the language in section 7 is better than the language in section 6 in the original bill, or in gross bill. But the compromise issue at my house, when my wife and I disagree, we usually we discuss it, we come to a compromise, and we do it her way. So the small districts still lose. The big districts control it. And that's been one of the concerns in our area up there for many years. Is that the big districts, like it or not, have the big boys and all of the small districts. And look right here, who's doing this? It's the personnel from the big districts. And bless you for doing this. This is a tough bill. I'm going to stand with your amendment, but with some serious concerns.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address that, losing the district, losing the school. In the 60s, the last consolidation, I was in a county way north of here. And that school, the small school, is still there.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Senator Anderson.
That high school is still there in that small town and thriving. There was also a small school in the northern part of the county I live in now, and that school is still there and thriving. So just because you lose your district doesn't mean you lose your principal and your school. The school remains, you just don't have the district. So I think people fear that way too much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Perkins.
Thank you. On the amendment, I've got a question. So I'm trying to marry the summary sheet that you gave us with the amendment that you gave us. And in particular, Mr. Chairman, I would look at on the amendment in particular, I think that my question is going to revolve around on page 2 of the amendment, lines 39 and 39 and 40, 38 to 40. And then, and that puts us onto page 50, that's modifying page 56 of the bill. And if, as I kind of gone through this and tried to pencil in the effect of this amendment, that what this does is that if you, as I understood the bill, starting on, basically on page 54 through pages 57, you were starting to step down to modify the health insurance component, which is particularly the as we're calling them, the ghost, the health insurance component for the ghost teachers. That's what's happening here, and the effect of lines 38 through 40 of the amendment take and strike out on page 56. It's a very simple amendment on line 7 and changes that 2/3 to 1/3. Mr. Chairman, and the reason I asked that question is I think these formulas in the step down, if you go to page 57 and look at line 13 on 57, you see it's 1/3 there. So I think that the effect of those lines is that where before you were going to have a step down on the reduction of the health care for these ghost teachers, that what was going to happen is in the coming school year, you'd step it down. You'd only get 2/3 of you only get 1/3 of the reduction. In the year 2, you get 2/3 of reduction. That's the way I think I understand it. And so ultimately, I think what happened is we've made the school year, the amendment makes school year 21 and 23, the step down for that, basically the same as for, 21 and 22, the same as 22 to 23. I think that's what that does. And so if I go back to the summary sheet, I think the effect of that is that if you go to the step down for that was 33 1/3% in school year 21-22 and 67.67. So the difference was $17 million decrease in the coming school year, and the following school year would be a $43.5 million decrease. I think so my question is am I understanding that that's the effect of those provisions? And if that's the case, then my question is, how do I mean, right now, so beginning tomorrow, I think the calendar is that renewal contracts, if you're gonna, or continuing contracts to go out to teachers in the next 30 to 45 days. So the budgets kind of have to be released tomorrow. Continuing contracts have to go out. And basically, these budgets have to be solidified and go into effect by July the 1st. And so for the coming school year, which is 2021 school year. And so if we do that and we accelerate that, what I see is a scramble, particularly because contrary to, you know, as an aside, most of the phantom teachers exist in the larger school districts. And so this is going to be, as I understand it, this is going to accelerate the reduction in that from 17.5 to 43.5 is what the amendment does. And so that's going to, that just makes a quick adjustment that has to happen for the coming school year, which they're already in the process of planning for. And so I'm interested to hear the thoughts on that and how our districts, you know, we had a great superintendent in our district that retired recently. He always told us he can accomplish whatever we want done, but he needs a little bit of time to do it, to avoid the major disruptions. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts and the committees and just kind of walk us through that reduction, because I think that's where the most reduction comes from. And the effect of this amendment, those 4 lines on the amendment are to make that reduction happen this year mostly this year instead of next.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the first thing to remember is this should not affect the insurance for any teacher that is now taking insurance from the school district, because this is aimed strictly at the ones that are not taking insurance. And we are going to go to a reimbursement system, and this is the estimating of the savings of that reimbursement system. If you have an increase in the teachers that take it, or it's not just the teachers, it's all the personnel, then we won't get as much savings as we're predicting. But we'll still, because of the way the Barlow amendment works in here, we'll still go to coming down to the same net reduction of the block grant that is permissible under the feds. So yes, there is an interplay with this, and the ghost teachers we're getting rid of. I think that may have been why we had the problem we're going to have an amendment on. But we've taken account of that now, and this reduction, let me emphasize this as strongly as I can, should not affect the insurance benefits available to any employee. But we know that there's about 27% of the employees, a little over that, and a small amount of it's double counted, where we count the same employee twice, just the mechanics of the way that accounting systems work. But mostly it's people who do not take insurance, and that's where the reductions are coming from. If that percentage changes to 25%, then we won't get quite the savings with that provision. They'll come through the Barlow, and the net effect of what the school districts get will be the same. But it is a reduction in the funding they're getting under the model. And frankly, that's one of the slush funds that we talked about all along. They're not nearly, we aren't reducing that nearly as much as the recalibration bill passed out of here, because we can't meet the federal maintenance of effort. The federal maintenance of effort is cutting us off at about 30% of the reduction we would have gotten on the bill we passed previously. We don't like it, but that's the way it is. They've changed the world on us. And this calculation should not give the districts any problem in going ahead and dealing with their continuing contracts, dealing with paying the teachers the way they always have. It should be, but it does mean they won't have the extra revenue coming in to use on all the other things that they've done. Because there is a real reduction here, and it's not the 10% we were hoping for. We were hoping for around 150, 140, 150 million. It's only about 45 million, I think, because the 43.5 is within the maintenance of effort that we're estimating here. So we're all right. We're meeting the federal requirements, but there is a real reduction. And, you know, everybody else funded by the state government has seen reductions. Go ask the health department. You know, Mr. Chairman, you know what happened to the health departments of other programs. Education is getting a very mild version of this, but we're able to achieve the savings we need because of being able to preserve the federal stimulus money, or the effect of the federal stimulus money. So I hope that answers the question, but it shouldn't be anything they have trouble to adjust to in this area.
We are still on the standing committee. Senator Perkins.
Thank you. Just to follow up, and I appreciate that explanation. I think that's a good discussion. I think though that I think as we talk about that and I understand and fully support the particularly the healthcare phase out for the ghost teachers, but just by way of illustration, and I think this piggybacks up on one of the concerns that my good colleague from Natrona County on the other side of the room mentioned before, and by way of illustration, Mr. Chairman, if we go to page 1 of the amendment, and we see there that part of this is going into that kind of definitional language of that's early in the first 48 pages of the bill. And so if you go to line 32 on page 1, you see this discussion about setting the teacher salaries in the model. So we've got teacher salaries equal to a 41,908.80, and then if they've got a kicker of about $7,000 kicker for a master's degree, you got to get about a $15,000 kicker if you get a bachelor's degree, and then you get about $1,000 a year kicker for seniority. And so I get all that, but going back to what my colleague from also from Trona County, so we have the medium size and the smaller size versions of senators from Trona County. But so anyway, one of the other versions of senators from Trona County, right, that when you have these teachers, not like it's true that we call it a slush fund, but ultimately what the district have used that for, they've used it to pay for a lot of things. They've used it to pay for additional superintendents, additional help and administrative help on its central services. They've used it for a number of things, but one of the things they have used it for is to increase salaries above the model. And there's a lot of teachers in the state that are getting salaries above the model. And so coming back to that point, and just for clarification, if you have be interested in your thoughts and the committee's thoughts on the fact that, if we have teachers who are making in excess of this is part of the slush fund is used to pay those teachers' salaries. And so surely it's not going to affect the amount they actually pay for insurance, but it does decrease the pool from which you're paying additional teacher salaries, along with lots of other expenses. And so, and maybe the answer is simply, it's up to the administration and they'll do what they're going to do. Although I think you've tried to protect some of that by making it categorical. But again, I'm worried about at this date, the smoothing. I have no problem getting there, particularly if they've got a year of warning that it's coming. I'm just worried at this point, we're putting this on them right in the middle of their budget process. And I'm concerned about the rapidity of which these cuts take effect. So I thank you. I'd be interested in the committee's thoughts.
Senator Scott and then Senator Osberg.
Mr. Chairman, the adjustment they're seeing in their total block grant, real cut, is in the $45 million. And the mechanics of it are through this insurance reduction, plus the Barlow amendment that takes us right down to what the feds will allow. That is, doing my math quickly in my head, it's in the 30% range. Whereas before, we were contemplating something that was much closer to 10%. It is a real reduction. They are going to have to deal with it. In the same way that everybody in the state government that is getting a reduction that comes in July 1st is going to have to deal with it. It's the same kind of thing. We have got to get our government in total down to where we can afford it with the revenues we take in. And yes, it would be nice to phase it in, but the House version doesn't do that. This version doesn't do that. The budget doesn't do that for the state government. Our problems, Mr. Chairman, as we have heard, as we dealt with the budget, our problems are here and now, and we've got to get the spending down. I think, frankly, a reduction in the vicinity of 3% instead of 10%. If the management of the school district is in the slightest conflict, they can deal with that successfully. And we are protecting the teachers. We aren't getting a further reduction in the teachers. We're actually kicking up a little bit what we're paying in the model for teachers. So I think we're all right on that score. I think we've got the teachers adequately protected. And, you know, frankly, what I've been hearing is districts could deal with a 10% reduction. They could deal with that. They can deal with this 3%. And that's what we're talking about here. Because the mechanics of that, we're coming right down to what the federal maintenance of effort requirement requires us to spend. And that is about a 3 point something reduction. So I urge you to support that. We did that much worse all over the rest of the state government or over the major parts of it. And frankly, I think education needs to step up to its plate and take that. And I think they can do it.
On the standing committee, Senator Wasserberg.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to reiterate actually what the good appropriations chair said, that is definitely the case of what has actually happened in our 48 school districts. As the districts, when this model was first put into effect, there were teachers that didn't take the health insurance, as we have heard. And so the good former Senate chair of education that we just named a highway after the very first year after we put this model into place, tried to take that out of the model and the health insurance piece, and it was voted down by this floor. Actually, and it didn't pass. So there has been attempts to try and fix that, but it needs to be fixed. I agree, it needs to be fixed. But what has happened since 2005 is that districts have grown to use that money for salaries. As they have pushed their salaries up, they've used some of that money that they receive for health insurance to do just that. And the good chairman from the education committee is absolutely correct. It will not impact any teacher that takes health insurance, but it's going to impact teachers that receive pay raises with that funding. And so my last question is, was there any discussion about keeping class size at K through 3 at 16?
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the fruits of that discussion are seen on page 2 of the amendment, lines 27 through 38. where the suggestion had been that they go to 16, we just automatically put that to 18. There's nothing to prevent a school district that has the resources from staying at 16. The information I have is that they're not doing it, probably with some exceptions. So we could change that, and it's on lines 34 and 35 of the amendment. Yes, it would be much better, or better. The research is, as I read the research, is coming in saying there hasn't been as much payoff from the lower class sizes as we had thought, but it would be better. And frankly, Mr. Chairman, it would be better if we went to 15. It would be even better if we went to 10. But there's no possible way that that can be done within the resources reasonably available. And it is the duty of this legislature to balance the resources with the benefits. And we're saying, okay, we can live with this. If a school district gets creative, it could still go to 16 the way that mechanics work, especially if they're not paying their teachers as much as some of the ones that have used more of the resources to pay higher wages to teachers and make them work harder by having a higher class level. There's an obvious trade-off there. And I would say that with the reductions, yes, there will have to be some over time, some reductions in salaries. But remember, Mr. Chairman, the majority of the people who work for school districts are not teachers. And some of the money that's been spent, diverted from the ghost teachers, the ghost insurance, to higher salaries, have been the administrators. And those salaries have gone up, and we had a provision dealing with that, Mr. Chairman, as Mr. Chairman will recall, in the recalibration bill we passed out of here. That's not present in this one. But that's an ongoing problem.
Further questions? Senator Kinski.
On the amendment and for the amendment. First, I do want to say to the Chairman of Education and the members of the Education Committee, thank you for all your work. This is ground that I've plowed many times, as have many people in this body. And it looks like every prior plowing yielded little harvest, but we may be making some progress under fiscal pressure finally to do something. With respect to, I've just got a few questions that I wanted to follow up on. I did get a chance to write my questions down so I can follow up on them with you. But to my colleague from the greater Tinsley metropolitan area, I do want to say this with respect to consolidation. I agree with the Chairman of Education. You can't not talk about it. The size of the savings that the average person in the street believes is possible from consolidation is easily 10 to 100 times what's actually possible. Our late friend Senator Coe kept reporting to a study, I think that was done in 2015, 2016, said you'd save $8 million. And so I keep beating that drum, but we've got to keep reiterating the message. My small districts, we've got kids that are already riding that school bus over an hour, hour and a half to get to their school. Now you close their school and take them further yet. They're going to be leaving well before sunrise and getting home well after sunset. So that school's got to stay there. But the language of this amendment is written to not necessarily say just consolidation. There's things we could do in terms of shared transportation, shared accounting, shared human resources. There might be a lot of administrative savings, and we have to look at it. Now, it's an arguable question whether it needs to be part of this bill, who needs to do it, but we've got to look at that so that we can keep answering the question from the public. Why is my school down the street closing and there's still that one way out there in the middle of nowhere? We can't not talk about it. I believe, though, the truth will set us free, because the truth of the matter is there's not that much savings to be had. So, and this is for the chairman or for the vice chair. One of the questions I asked with respect to the amendment is the easiest. Will we be able to get a tracked bill with the second, prior to the second reading? That would be helpful. Second, I think you answered my question. The reason that we are not putting greater, that the health insurance is reimbursed at the lesser of the district actual out of pocket or state cost rather than the greater of, is that this maintenance of effort under this ARP, we have to be, we kind of hit a floor. Why does the Barlow Amendment not take care of that? Why does the Barlow Amendment not deal with that? Why couldn't you say we're getting rid of ghost teachers? We're getting rid of paying for insurance for people who aren't on the payroll. We're only going to pay you the lesser of your actual out of pocket, the state health insurance cost, and a couple of other areas where potentially it's $150 million plus savings. Why can't the Barlow Amendment kick in and say, why doesn't it kick in and say, subject, however, to the following? If at any point that the model generates something that's less than the 3-year rolling average such that we'd lose these federal funds, gross it back up. So I'm trying to understand why we can only put in 2/3 of the savings and the Barlow Amendment doesn't backfill that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott, and then Senator Landon, if he had a question.
Mr. Chairman, part of that is the Barlow Amendment, as I understand. And God knows this thing is so complicated that I reserve the right to be wrong. But as I understand the Barlow Amendment, what it does is it takes us all the way down to the federal maintenance effort, right on the button. If we were to fall below the federal maintenance effort requirement, something else is done. There's no mechanism in the Barlow Amendment to bring us back up. It's that, and that's the way it was written. The less we have to negotiate with the other body, the better on one of these things. And that was a very good effort that they made, and I want to honor that. I didn't want to rewrite that. Mr. Chairman, so we're trying to stay above that. We could entirely do away with the insurance cut and just let the Barlow Amendment carry. But that is an across the board kind of thing. That doesn't sit as well with our courts. We do have to pay attention to them. It's better to take the majority of the reductions in a specific thing where we can say this money is not being used for the purpose it's intended, so it's more efficient not to put it out there. And there is a district by district difference in the effect of the two, I believe. Frankly, I think if you went to pure Barlow Amendment, you'd hit the smaller school districts harder. So we did not elect to do that. We thought it's best to say we won't reimburse for employees that don't take insurance. So that's the reason we went the way we did. But we thought it was best to take maximum advantage of that and then rely on the Barlow Amendment for the balance. So we're relying on it, but it's not a big enough item to justify anybody suing us and going through a big fight in our courts over it. I think the courts would approve it, but you could get out of hand on that just across the board and lose the thing. So, Mr. Chairman, that's why it works that way.
Mr. President.
Quick reminder, folks, no personal names, just reference it as an amendment. Thank you.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I assume we'll carry this over into the afternoon, and I'll save my questions and a couple of comments for them. Thank you.
Senator Kinsky.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, if I'm understanding, and I don't know what to call the amendment now, that amendment, it's a cap, but not a floor. It's a cap that says, no matter what this black box of a model generates for the next 3 years, you're not going to spend any more than, because I don't understand the feds to be limiting how much we can spend on the upside. I understand them to be saying we have a minimum we've got to spend. And I heard you describing the Barlow Amendment as a cap rather than a floor. And so,
Mr. Senator Kinsky.
I'm sorry, that amendment. As a cap rather than a floor. You said it, we can spend no more than under that amendment. And so now I think what you're doing then is on a component by component basis, you're grossing it, you're trying to gross up to avoid the loss of federal funds because we're spending too little. I'm still struggling to make sure I'm tracking what we're doing here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and I think we've got a semantics issue here. Let's refer to that amendment as the section 5, because that's what it is in the bill. What that amendment does is ensures that we take maximum advantage of the reduction. So if I say we're trying to take as much of the reduction in the things we can defend easily in a court fight, because they're not spending them on what we're allowing. So if the ceiling is in the vicinity of 45 million, say it's 45 million, in terms of the total amount of reduction that we can take. The Barlow Amendment ensures we'll take section 5 ensures that we will take our reductions to that 45 million level is allowed. And that's the way it works. And we have to be careful not to go over, take more reductions than the federal maintenance of effort, or we will pay back to the feds the amount we go over. It looks like you don't lose the whole thing. You have to pay them back that. But it offends us to have to pay the feds back at all. We want to get right to the level, but not go beyond. And that section 5 amendment, as it's written, takes us right there. Mr. Chairman, I hope that explains it.
Still on the standing committee. Any other questions? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Scott's motion to adopt the standing committee to House Bill 173, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The motion to adopt the standing committee to House Bill 173 has passed. We are back on the bill. Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee of the whole beg leave to rise and sit again.
You heard the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Carried. Mr. President.
So we'll hold up on reading any reports, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. We're not going to read in any reports, Mr. Floor Leader.
Till 2 p.m.
Announcements. Announcements. Let's go over here, Senator Ellis, then back to
Thank you,
Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Select Committee on Tribal Relations will be meeting today in Capitol Extension Room W06 and online upon the noon recess to discuss interim topics. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President.
your joint conference committee on House Bill 121, which is the capital construction bill, state funded capital construction. We'll meet with the light committee from the House at 1 o'clock in room 301, the appropriations room, to take up the joint conference committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, your favorite committee, Minerals, number 9, will meet today after the noon recess in Capital Extension Room W004 and online. We'll hear House Joint Resolution 13, support of Taiwan. We'll hear House Bill 166, utilities presumption against early facility retirements. We'll hear House Bill 155, electric generation reliability, House Bill 170, Wyoming Economic Development Zones, and House Bill 239, Wyoming Workers' Compensation Student Learner Agreements. We may have to run over a little bit, may be back later than 2. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Senator Landon.
Mr. President, your Transportation Committee will meet upon adjournment this afternoon or this evening in Capital Extension W2. We will be taking up House Bill 159 engrossed liquor manufacturer regulations, a re-referral from Committee 7 corporations, again, upon adjournment tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your number 1 committee will meet 15 minutes upon noon recess to hear the following 3 bills. House Bill 236, firearms transaction financial discrimination. House Bill 210, minor sex traffic victims liability. And House Bill 247, law enforcement hiring practices.
Thank you. Any further announcements? Folks, we had a meeting with the chairs, but that pushes us too far into your lunch hour. Many of you have responsibilities during the lunch hour, so chairs, take care of your responsibilities. We'll try to reassign that meeting later. So with that, you've heard the motion. We stand recessed. The Senate will stand recessed until, all in favor of that motion, say aye. Those opposed, no. The Senate will stand recessed until